Well, thank you for having me. When I think about innovation, I typically tend to think toward entrepreneurship because that's been my background. I have been in university startups for my entire career, but not on the university side, really on the startup side. And my first valuable lesson that I learned was that as a graduate student, when I started my first company based on my graduate research, was that I didn't own my graduate research. The university did. So I had to go in and negotiate for what I thought was my technology in the first place. That was my first lesson, and of course I've carried that through. Been involved in about, more or less, about 100 startups. I've been CEO about 20 or so. Been on the board of the other 80 or so, mostly out of university. The one thing that was mentioned is the history in Michigan. I'm relatively new to the state. I have had companies all over the country, Illinois, Massachusetts, California, different locations, different ecosystems. And what I learned in coming here to Michigan is that the culture had changed. And I think that's not lost on anybody, that 100 years ago this was the hub. I'm going to steal some of Bob's thunder because he likes to talk about this as well. This was the hub of innovation. This was the place in the world, was the state of Michigan. And what seemed to have happened by the studies and just by my observations is that the success that came to the state of Michigan changed the dynamic from small startup entrepreneurial innovative to large growing organizations. And if you look at Michigan State and you look at our curriculum, it's not a big surprise that we're well known in things like HR. We're well known in things like supply chain. We're well known in things like packaging. Okay, we're well known in things to educate students more toward larger companies, historically in the last number of years. Now that is changing. We are changing that back toward more of an entrepreneurial focus where there's a nice balance between the two. And when you look at entrepreneurs, the studies show that people become entrepreneurs for one of two reasons, either out of desire or out of necessity. And out of necessity, it's largely the developing nations. But there's now this gray area, this hybrid, where when 2008 hit, it was a shock to a lot of people. I was running a large hedge fund at the time. We were $6 billion under management. And it was not a really good time to be in the financial industry, let alone the auto industry. I actually ended up spending 24 months between 2008 and 2010 selling 100 companies in 24 months, which is not the way you want to go about selling companies, but we had to because we had redemptions to meet. I came here shortly after that, and with the shock to the system in 2008, I think a lot of people realized, you know, the days of graduating college and going off and working for 30 years and then retiring may not be as secure as we once thought it was. Maybe we kind of want to take a look at some different aspects, some different avenues, some different career paths. In many ecosystems, entrepreneurship had always been viewed as a badge of honor, certainly in the East Coast, certainly in the West Coast. In other areas, it's been viewed as that thing you do when you can't find a job. Okay? And I think what we're seeing is a change in attitude, especially in the Midwest, about entrepreneurship, that things are starting to look more like it really is a kind of a career that somebody can have and somebody should have, especially to spur economic development as we move forward. What we do at Spartan Innovations is we create the companies out of Michigan State. The good news about this ecosystem here is that it's a very tight-knit ecosystem, meaning you have access to lots of different people, lots of different programs. What's also great about this ecosystem is that MEDC is doing an awful lot to help support this ecosystem. You don't really see that a lot in Massachusetts. You don't see that in a lot of states because it's a different ecosystem, different things come into play. But here in Michigan, we have a lot of rows pulling in the same direction. Now, given this audience, I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the things that we still need. There are three critical pieces that we need in the state of Michigan. Maybe not so much in Ann Arbor, but certainly in this East Lansing area. We need talent. We always need talent. If you look at Boston, I licensed technology out of MIT to start one of my submarine companies. If you go to MIT at any given point in time, there are CEOs literally walking the hallways of the university looking for their next best thing. It's absolutely true. Every time I was there, which was probably once a week, there were 2 or 3 CEOs walking the hallways that I knew looking for their next best thing. We don't have that kind of nexus of talent, if you will, here in the Lansing area. These are guys and gals who have been there and done that. We don't have that because of the industry that grew up around here. So we may need to import talent or train the talent through university. But that's one thing that we need is talent. And we also need to retain the talent that we have. We don't really want to, I don't really want to see it going to the West Coast or the East Coast. I want to see it remain here. So the first thing we need is talent. We need these CEOs. We need these senior VP types who know how to start companies, who know how to raise money, who know how to build organizations for the future. So that's one thing we need. The other thing we need is capital. Now, this is kind of a double-edged sword. If you look at the venture capital world, there are 450 venture capital firms in the country, okay? By the count in the state, I think we have 28, is that right, thereabouts? Mid-20s, which, okay, that's not too bad. But if you look at assets under management, or AUM as it's called, the average AUM of a venture capital firm across the country is over $100 million. The average AUM here in the state is about an order of magnitude lower than that, okay? So the bad news is that there isn't an awful lot of venture capital money in the state. The good news is that the people who control that are very smart and they're very accessible. You probably have heard the stories about Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York and how difficult it is to get in to see a venture capitalist. That's true. It's very difficult to get in to see them. Here, we know everybody, so it's accessible. But what we really need is more very early stage capital. If you look at the academic studies, they'll tell you that today, about 10% of venture capitalists invest early stage. By early stage, I mean pre-revenue, okay, way pre-revenue, in that valley of death or even before the valley of death. That means about 45 firms across the country. Now, if you ask one of them, what is the last pre-revenue deal you did? They're going to scratch their head for a while because they probably haven't done one since before 2008, okay, when the venture capitalists kind of fled the early stage market. And it comes in cycles. They'll flee it, then times will get good, they'll get more investment dollars, then they'll go back into the early stage. And then another bubble will pop and then they'll flee it. It's cyclical and the studies show that. Right now, they're still kind of out of the game as opposed to where they were in 2005, 6, and 7. So there's a need for the pre-seed revenue kind of dollars, not just in the state, but in this country for that matter. So that's the second thing we need is capital, especially the early stage type. Third thing we need are facilities. Now, there's plenty of office space around. But here in Lansing, one thing we're really missing is wet lab space. And that may come as a shock to you. So you may think, well, we have a huge research institute here. There's got to be laboratory space around. And when I first got here, I was told that was a need that we have. You know, Bob told me that. And I said, that's crazy. You know, I come from the Boston area, the California area. There's plenty of empty lab space around. And in Michigan, that's true. There is empty lab space around, but not in this area. So the companies that we're spinning out of the university that require laboratory space don't have any place local to go. And you might say, well, you know, can't these lazy professors just go to Ann Arbor? And, you know, and I wouldn't characterize all professors as lazy. Certainly there are plenty of them that are lazy, but the fact of the matter is, you know, they have full-time jobs. And the commute, an hour, hour and a half each way, is just not going to do it for them. So we need some wet lab space in the local area so that when we spin these companies out, they have a place to go. And right now, we're just kind of hodgepodging it together as best we can. Yeah, it's expensive. And a lot of people won't build it on spec because you just don't know how many tenants you're going to get. And I understand that. But I'm hopeful that somebody's going to come to the table and say, hey, listen, I'm willing to take a bet on this. I'm willing to take a bet on Lansing and East Lansing and build this space so that we can keep our talent and keep our technologies in this local area. So my message is that there's a lot of good things happening. We have curriculum growing, we have the state engaged, we have great people, Bob and others here that are really working this issue very hard. But we have a long way to go. And the three things we need, just remember this: talent, early stage capital, and facilities. And I apologize ahead of time, but I have to leave at 12:30. But I am leaving my business cards here, so if you want to get in touch with me, please reach out and get in touch and let me know how you might be able to help us.